The screaming began at 6:47 a.m., just as the morning shift was settling into their routines. Dr. Sarah Chin had been reviewing patient charts when the sound ripped through the recovery ward like a siren of the damned. It wasn't the usual post-operative discomfort or medication-induced nightmares. This was primal terror, raw and animalistic, echoing from room 314 where Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell had been recovering from her hip replacement surgery. Sarah dropped her coffee, the ceramic mug shattering against the linoleum floor as she sprinted toward the source of the chaos. The morning sunlight streamed through the hospital windows, casting long shadows that seemed to dance with malevolent intent. What she found in room 314 would haunt her for the rest of her shortened life. Mrs. Hartwell was no longer the gentle 73-year-old grandmother who had been reading romance novels just hours before. Her pale blue eyes had turned a sickly yellow, shot through with veins of black that pulsed like infected arteries. Her mouth hung open in a perpetual snarl, revealing teeth that had somehow sharpened to points overnight. But most disturbing of all was her skin. It had taken on a translucent quality, as if she were slowly becoming glass, and beneath the surface, something dark writhed like living shadows. Mrs. Hartwell? Sarah approached cautiously, her medical training warring with every instinct that screamed at her to run. "Eleanor, can you hear me?" The thing that had been Mrs. Hartwell turned its head with an unnatural jerky movement that made Sarah's stomach lurch. A low growl emanated from its throat, a sound no human vocal cords should have been able to produce. Then it lunged. Sarah barely managed to slam the door shut before the creature crashed against it, the impact so violent that the reinforced glass window spiderwebbed. She pressed her back against the door, her heart hammering against her ribs as she fumbled for her radio with shaking hands. "Security to Recovery Ward East, immediately," she gasped into the device. We have a situation in room 314. The response crackled back, distorted by static. "Dr. Chin, did you say Recovery Ward East?" "That's impossible. Recovery Ward East was evacuated 3 hours ago due to a gas leak." Sarah's blood turned to ice. She looked around the hallway, really looked for the first time since arriving for her shift. The ward was eerily quiet except for the rhythmic thudding from room 314. Where were the other patients? Where was the nursing staff? The orderlies who should have been making their rounds? "That's impossible," she whispered into the radio. "I've been here since 6:30. There was no evacuation order." But as she spoke, she noticed something that made her knees weak. The morning sunlight streaming through the windows wasn't quite right. It had a greenish tint, like light filtered through stagnant water, and it seemed to move independently of the clouds outside. Worse, wherever the strange light touched, the walls appeared to be breathing. A new sound joined the chaos, the elevator doors opening with their familiar ding. Sarah turned to see Dr. Marcus Webb step out, his usually pristine lab coat stained with something dark. His face was pale, his eyes wide with shock. "Sarah, thank God," he breathed, hurrying toward her. "I've been looking for anyone who's still normal." "Marcus, what's happening? Where is everyone?" He glanced nervously at the writhing shadows cast by the unnatural sunlight. It started in the basement morgue around 4 a.m. The bodies, they started changing. Not dying, not decomposing, changing. Into something else. The security cameras caught it all before they went dark. Behind the door, Mrs. Hartwell's growling had taken on a different quality, almost like she was communicating with something. Sarah and Marcus exchanged terrified glances as an answering call echoed from somewhere deeper in the hospital. "It's spreading," Marcus whispered. "Whatever this is, it's not just affecting the dead. It's the living too, but only those who've been here overnight." "The sunlight? I think the sunlight is what triggers the final transformation." Sarah looked at the greenish light creeping across the floor toward their feet. "Then we need to get out of here. Now." But as they turned toward the stairwell, they heard it, the sound of multiple doors opening throughout the ward, followed by a chorus of inhuman howls that spoke of hunger and something far worse than death. Part 2, The Basement Revelation. The stairwell plunged them into merciful darkness, away from the sickly green sunlight that had turned their familiar workplace into a nightmare. Sarah's breath came in short gasps as she and Marcus descended, their footsteps echoing ominously in the concrete shaft. The emergency lighting cast eerie red shadows that danced across the walls like warning signals. "The basement," Marcus panted, his hand gripping the metal railing so tightly his knuckles were white. "I need to show you what I found down there. It's the only way you'll understand what we're really dealing with." They reached the basement level, and Marcus hesitated at the door marked, "Authorized person only, morgue." His hand trembled as he reached for the keycard scanner. Sarah, what I'm about to show you, it's going to change everything you thought you knew about medicine, about life and death. The morgue doors slid open with a pneumatic hiss, revealing a scene that belonged in the depths of hell rather than a sterile medical facility. The fluorescent lights flickered sporadically, casting intermittent illumination over rows of examination tables. But it wasn't the familiar sight of covered bodies that made Sarah's mind reel, it was what had happened to them. The corpses were moving, not with the shambling gait of movie zombies, but with purpose and intelligence. They stood in perfect formation, their translucent skin pulsing with the same dark veins they had seen in Mrs. Hartwell. But these beings were different, more advanced in their transformation. Their eyes glowed with an inner light, and when they turned to look at the two living humans, Sarah saw something that chilled her to the bone: recognition. "They remember," Marcus whispered. "They remember who they were, but there's something else now. Something that's been waiting." One of the transformed corpses stepped forward, and Sarah gasped in recognition. It was Dr. Patricia Vance, the chief of surgery who had died in a car accident 3 days ago. Her voice, when she spoke, was layered with harmonics that shouldn't have been possible. "Marcus," she said, her words carrying an otherworldly resonance. "You've brought her. Good. We need her to understand." "Understand what?" Sarah demanded, fighting every instinct to flee. Dr. Vance's transformed features arranged themselves into something that might have been a smile. "That death isn't the end. It's evolution. We are the next step, Sarah. The hospital has been chosen as a catalyst, a place where the barrier between life and death is thinnest." Marcus stepped closer to Sarah, his voice urgent. "The hospital was built on an ancient burial ground, but not just any burial ground. According to the records I found, it was a place where indigenous peoples once conducted rituals to commune with the dead. The construction disrupted something that had been sleeping for centuries." "That's impossible," Sarah protested, but even as she spoke, she felt the truth of it in her bones. The strange occurrences over the past months, equipment malfunctioning, patients reporting visions, the unusually high number of complications during routine surgeries, it all began to make sense. "The morning sunlight," Dr. Vance continued, her glowing eyes fixed on Sarah, "acts as a trigger. It's not ordinary light anymore. It's been changed, filtered through the spiritual energy that's been awakening beneath this place. Those who die here or who are weakened by illness or surgery become conduits for this transformation." Sarah shook her head frantically. "This is insane. There has to be a scientific explanation." "There is," Marcus said quietly. "But it's not the kind of science they teach in medical school. The energy readings I've been taking show massive electromagnetic fluctuations centered on this building. The geological surveys reveal caverns beneath us that extend for miles, filled with crystalline formations that seem to amplify and focus spiritual energy." One of the other transformed beings, a young man who had been brought in after a motorcycle accident, stepped forward. His voice joined Dr. Vance's in an eerie harmony. "We are not monsters, Dr. Chin. We are pioneers. The first to cross the threshold between worlds. But we need the living to help us complete the transition." "Complete what transition?" Sarah asked, though she dreaded the answer. "The hospital is a doorway," Dr. Vance explained. "But it can only be opened from both sides. The dead from below, the living from above. When enough of the living have been transformed, the barrier will dissolve completely. The worlds of the living and the dead will merge, and humanity will transcend its limitations." The temperature in the morgue had dropped noticeably, and Sarah could see her breath forming small clouds in the air. The transformed beings began to move closer, their movements synchronized and purposeful. "You have a choice," Dr. Vance said, her voice now carrying the weight of authority she had wielded in life. "Join us willingly, and retain your consciousness through the transformation. Or resist and become something far less than what you could be." Sarah grabbed Marcus's arm, pulling him toward the door. "We need to leave. Now." But as they reached the exit, they found their path blocked by more transformed beings, patients and staff who had died in the hospital over the past several months. Their glowing eyes reflected the emergency lighting like a constellation of fallen stars. "There is nowhere to run," Dr. Vance said softly. "The transformation has already begun in everyone who has spent time within these walls. The only question is whether you will embrace it or fight it." Sarah felt a cold dread settling in her stomach as she realized the truth. The strange fatigue she had been experiencing, the vivid dreams, the way shadows seemed to move independently, the change was already happening to her. Part 3, the infection spreads. The elevator shaft had become their only escape route, but as Sarah and Marcus climbed the maintenance ladder, the sounds of pursuit echoed from below. The transformed beings moved with unnatural agility, their translucent fingers finding impossible purchase on the smooth metal walls. The red emergency lighting cast their shadows in grotesque patterns that seemed to reach ahead of them, grasping for the fleeing humans. Third floor, Marcus gasped, his breath forming ice crystals in the suddenly frigid air. The pediatric ward might still be clear. Sarah's hands were numb with cold as she pushed open the access door. The pediatric ward should have been filled with the usual morning sounds, crying babies, worried parents, the gentle voices of nurses. Instead, an oppressive silence hung over the brightly colored hallway like a funeral shroud. The morning sunlight streaming through the windows had intensified, its greenish tint now so pronounced that it looked like they were underwater. Where the light touched the cartoon characters painted on the walls, the images seemed to writhe and change, their cheerful faces distorting into expressions of terror and hunger. "Dr. Chin?" A small voice called from one of the rooms. "Dr. Chin, is that you?" Sarah's heart clenched as she recognized the voice of Tommy Patterson, an 8-year-old boy who had been admitted for appendicitis 3 days ago. She pushed open the door to his room, and what she saw made her stomach turn. Tommy sat up in his hospital bed, but his transformation was unlike anything they had witnessed. Children, it seemed, were affected differently. His skin had taken on an almost ethereal quality, translucent but shot through with veins of pure light rather than the dark corruption they had seen in the adults. His eyes glowed with an inner radiance that was both beautiful and terrifying. "I can see them," Tommy said, his voice carrying impossible wisdom for his age. "The ones who came before. They're not evil, Dr. Chin. They're just lonely. They've been waiting so long for someone to understand." "Tommy, we need to get you out of here," Sarah said, approaching the bed cautiously. The boy shook his head, his luminous eyes filled with sadness. "It's too late for that. The change has already begun in all of us. But you can choose how it happens. The children, we can help make it gentle." Marcus grabbed Sarah's arm. "We need to keep moving. The temperature's dropping faster now." As they left Tommy's room, Sarah caught sight of other pediatric patients through open doorways. Each child had undergone the same transformation, their small bodies radiating that ethereal light. But unlike the adults, they seemed at peace, as if they had accepted their fate with the resilience that only children possessed. The hospital's PA system crackled to life, and Dr. Vance's transformed voice echoed through the corridors. "Attention all staff and patients. The transformation is accelerating. Those who have not yet been changed have approximately 2 hours before the process becomes irreversible. The children can guide you through the transition with minimal trauma. Do not resist. Do not fight. Embrace evolution." Sarah and Marcus reached the central nursing station, where they found something that made their blood freeze. The security monitors were still functional, displaying feeds from throughout the hospital. Every floor showed the same scene, transformed beings moving through the corridors with purpose, searching for the remaining uninfected. But it was the external cameras that revealed the true scope of the horror. The strange green sunlight wasn't confined to the hospital. It stretched across the entire city, and wherever it touched, people were beginning to change. The transformation wasn't just happening within the hospital walls. It was spreading outward like a plague of evolution. "My God," Marcus whispered. "It's not just the hospital. The entire city is becoming a catalyst." The radio crackled with desperate transmissions from emergency services. "This is Fire Station 19. We have officers down, repeat, officers down. Something's happening to the light. People are changing. Request immediate backup. This is Metro General Emergency. All available units respond to citywide medical emergency. Patients are experiencing simultaneous transformations. Cause unknown. Recommend evacuation of all medical facilities." Sarah felt the weight of comprehension crushing down on her. The hospital was just the beginning, the focal point, but the effect is spreading through the sunlight itself. A new sound joined the chaos, the rumble of helicopters overhead. Through the windows they could see military aircraft circling the city, their searchlights cutting through the green-tinged air. But even as they watched, some of the helicopters began to waver in their flight patterns, as if their pilots were succumbing to the same transformation. "We need to get to the roof," Marcus said, his voice tight with desperation. "Maybe we can signal for help, get evacuated before it's too late." But as they made their way toward the stairwell, they encountered their first group of transformed hospital staff. Unlike the beings in the morgue, these individuals had only recently changed. Their transformation was incomplete, creating a horrifying hybrid of human and something else entirely. Nurse Janet Morrison, who had worked the night shift for 15 years, stood at the head of the group. Half of her face still retained its human appearance, while the other half had become translucent, revealing the bone structure beneath. Her voice was a mixture of her familiar tone and something far more alien. "Sarah Marcus," she said, her partially transformed features arranged in a grotesque parody of concern. "You look tired. You should rest. The transformation is easier when you don't fight it." "Janet, please," Sarah pleaded. "You know me. We've worked together for years. This isn't you." The nurse's transformed eye glowed with inner light. "But it is me. It's the me I was always meant to be. The me I could never become while trapped in flesh and limitation. Join us, Sarah. Feel what it's like to truly be alive." More transformed staff members emerged from the shadows, their partially changed forms creating a nightmare gallery of human evolution gone wrong. They moved with deliberate coordination, cutting off all escape routes except the path that led deeper into the hospital. "They're hurting us," Marcus realized. "They want us to go to a specific location." The PA system crackled again. "Dr. Chin, Dr. Webb, please report to the surgical theater on the 7th floor. The final phase of your transformation requires a more controlled environment." Sarah felt the cold certainty of doom settling over her. They were being led to their fate like lambs to slaughter, but the alternative was to face the transformed beings that now blocked every other exit. "The surgical theater," she whispered. "That's where this ends." Part 4. The Surgical Theater of Souls. The 7th floor surgical theater had been transformed into something that defied both medical science and human comprehension. The operating tables had been arranged in a perfect circle, their surfaces gleaming with an otherworldly light that seemed to emanate from within the metal itself. The fluorescent lights overhead had been replaced by the same green-tinged illumination that poured through the windows, creating an atmosphere more suited to an occult ritual than a medical procedure. Dr. Vance stood at the center of the circle, her transformed features now fully evolved into something that transcended human limitations. Her translucent skin pulsed with veins of pure energy, and her eyes had become windows to a dimension beyond mortal understanding. Around her, other transformed beings, patients and staff who had died in this very theater, waited in perfect formation. "Welcome," Dr. Vance said, her voice now carrying harmonics that resonated in Sarah's bones. "You have arrived at the heart of the transformation. This is where the boundary between life and death has always been thinnest, where we have fought so hard to preserve life that we have inadvertently created the perfect conditions for transcendence." Sarah and Marcus were escorted into the theater by the partially transformed staff members, their movements no longer entirely their own. The cold that had been spreading through the hospital was most intense here, and their breath formed clouds that seemed to take on lives of their own, swirling in patterns that suggested intelligence. "The surgical theater," Dr. Vance continued, "is where we have performed our most desperate interventions, where we have reached into the space between worlds to pull souls back from the brink. Every surgery, every moment of crisis, every death and resurrection has charged this space with energy. It has become a nexus point." Marcus struggled against his escorts, his scientific mind still fighting to rationalize what they were experiencing. "This is impossible. Energy doesn't work this way. Consciousness doesn't transfer between dimensions." One of the transformed beings, a surgeon who had died during a heart attack while performing an operation, stepped forward. His voice carried the weight of professional authority even in his changed state. "Dr. Webb, you are thinking in terms of the old paradigm. But consciousness was never confined to the brain. It was always something more, something that exists in the spaces between atoms, in the quantum foam that underlies all reality." Sarah felt a strange tingling sensation spreading through her body, starting from her extremities and working inward. The transformation was accelerating, triggered by her proximity to the nexus point that the surgical theater had become. "The process is beginning," Dr. Vance observed, her glowing eyes fixed on Sarah. "Your cellular structure is starting to phase shift. Soon, you will be able to perceive the true nature of existence." Through the theater's windows, Sarah could see the city beyond. The green-tinged sunlight had intensified, and the transformation was spreading exponentially. People in the streets were changing, their bodies becoming translucent, their movements taking on the same coordinated purpose she had witnessed in the hospital. "Why?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why is this happening?" Dr. Vance's transformed features arranged themselves into an expression of infinite compassion. "Because humanity has reached a crossroads. For too long we have fought against the natural order, using medical science to prevent death, to keep souls trapped in failing bodies. But death was never meant to be the end, it was meant to be a doorway. The surgical instruments on the tables began to glow with their own inner light, and Sarah realized with horror that they were not instruments at all. They were living extensions of the transformed beings, tools that had evolved beyond their original purpose. The hospital became a focal point because of the concentration of life and death energy, the transformed surgeon explained. Every patient who died here, every life saved, every moment of transition created a resonance that eventually tore through the barrier between dimensions. Marcus was fighting harder now, his movements becoming more desperate as the transformation began to affect him as well. This isn't evolution. This is possession. You're not human anymore. No, Dr. Vance agreed, her voice filled with something that might have been joy. We are so much more than human. We are what humanity was always meant to become. The temperature in the theater had dropped to the point where frost was forming on the windows, and Sarah could see her reflection in the ice. But it wasn't her reflection anymore. Her features were beginning to change, becoming more angular, more ethereal. Her eyes were developing the same inner glow she had seen in the others. The children adapt most easily, Dr. Vance said, gesturing to the windows that looked down on the pediatric ward. They have fewer preconceptions about what is possible. The elderly, those who are closer to death, also transition smoothly. But adults in their prime like yourselves often resist. Sarah felt her consciousness expanding, touching the edges of something vast and incomprehensible. She could sense the transformed beings throughout the hospital, their thoughts and emotions flowing together like a river of shared experience. But she could also sense something else, a presence that was ancient and patient, something that had been waiting beneath the hospital for centuries. What is it? She gasped, her voice now carrying the same harmonic resonance as the others. What's been waiting? Dr. Vance's glow intensified. The original inhabitants of this land. The indigenous peoples who conducted their death rituals here understood something that we had forgotten. Death is not an ending, it is a transformation into a higher state of being. When the hospital was built, it disturbed their sacred ground, but it also created the perfect conditions for their prophecies to be fulfilled. The walls of the surgical theater began to pulse with their own rhythm, and Sarah realized that the entire building had become a living entity, its corridors serving as arteries, its rooms as organs in some vast organism that transcended physical space. The hospital is alive, she whispered, the truth hitting her like a physical blow. Yes, Dr. Vance confirmed. And soon the entire city will be as well. The transformation will spread until the boundary between the world of the living and the world of the dead no longer exists. Humanity will evolve beyond the limitations of flesh and mortality. Sarah felt the last of her resistance crumbling as the transformation took hold. But in that moment of surrender, she caught sight of something that filled her with hope. In the distance, beyond the hospital grounds, she could see figures moving against the green-tinged light. They were approaching the hospital, and their movements suggested purpose and determination. Someone was coming. Someone who might still be able to stop this nightmare before it consumed the world. Part 5. The Resistance Arrives. The approaching figures moved with military precision through the transformed cityscape, their protective suits glowing with an inner light that seemed to repel the green-tinged atmosphere. Sarah watched through the surgical theater's windows as they advanced, her transformed vision now able to perceive details that would have been invisible to human eyes. Who are they? Marcus asked, his voice now carrying the harmonic resonance of the transformed, though his consciousness still fought against the change. Dr. Vance's luminous features darkened with what might have been concern. They are the Threshold Guardians. We knew they would come eventually. The lead figure removed their helmet, revealing a face that Sarah recognized from medical conferences. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a specialist in infectious diseases who had mysteriously disappeared from the public eye 5 years ago. But there was something different about her now, something that suggested she had encountered the transformation before and found a way to resist it. Dr. Vasquez, Sarah whispered, her transformed voice carrying across impossible distances. She's immune. Not immune, Dr. Vance corrected. Adapted. She and her team have learned to exist in the space between transformation and humanity. They are neither fully alive nor fully evolved, and they have made it their mission to prevent others from achieving transcendence. Through the hospital's communication system, Dr. Vasquez's voice crackled to life. This is Dr. Elena Vasquez of the Threshold Research Initiative. The hospital is under quarantine. All transformed entities are to remain within the containment zone. Any attempt to spread the transformation beyond the established perimeter will result in immediate intervention. The transformed beings throughout the hospital began to move with new urgency, their coordinated actions suggesting they were preparing for battle. But this would not be a conventional fight. Sarah could sense that the conflict would take place on multiple levels of reality simultaneously. The Threshold Research Initiative, Dr. Vance explained, her form beginning to pulse with defensive energy. They are scientists and military personnel who have encountered similar transformations in other locations around the world. They believe they are protecting humanity, but they are actually preventing our species from evolving beyond its current limitations. Sarah felt her consciousness expanding further, touching the memories of the transformed beings around her. Through their shared experience, she began to understand the scope of what was happening. The hospital was not the first location where the barrier between worlds had been breached. Similar events had occurred in other places: research facilities, ancient burial grounds, locations where the boundary between life and death had been worn thin by human activity. There have been others, she realized. Other transformations, other attempts at evolution. Yes, Dr. Vance confirmed. And each time, the Threshold Guardians have arrived to contain and reverse the process. They fear change, fear the unknown. They would rather keep humanity trapped in its current state than allow us to transcend our limitations. The first of Dr. Vasquez's team entered the hospital through the main entrance, their protective suits providing them with resistance to the transformation energy. But Sarah could see that the resistance was not perfect. Hairline cracks in their suits glowed with the same green light that suffused the building. They cannot resist forever, the transformed surgeon observed. The energy is too strong here, too concentrated. Their suits will fail, and they will join us willingly or not. But Dr. Vasquez seemed to anticipate this. Through the hospital's security system, Sarah watched as the team deployed devices that created pockets of normal space within the transformed environment. The devices hummed with a frequency that seemed to disrupt the transformation energy, creating safe zones where the team could operate. Harmonic disruptors, Marcus realized, his scientific mind still functioning despite his transformation. They're using sound frequencies to interfere with the dimensional resonance. The effect was immediate and painful. The transformed beings throughout the hospital recoiled from the disruption fields, their translucent forms flickering like candle flames in a strong wind. Sarah felt her own transformation wavering, her consciousness being pulled back toward its human limitations. They're trying to reverse the process, Dr. Vance said, her voice now tinged with what might have been fear. But the transformation is too far advanced. The reversal will destroy us rather than cure us. Dr. Vasquez's voice echoed through the hospital again. All surviving humans are to evacuate immediately. The containment protocol will begin in 30 minutes. Anyone remaining in the building after that time will be considered irreversibly transformed. Sarah felt a surge of panic, not for herself but for the children in the pediatric ward. They had adapted to the transformation more easily than the adults, but they were still children, still innocent of the cosmic forces that had swept them up. The children, she said, her voice carrying new urgency. They don't understand what's happening. They need to be protected. But as she spoke, she realized that her definition of protection had changed. She no longer wanted to save the children from the transformation. She wanted to protect them from the Threshold Guardians who sought to reverse it. The conflict was about to begin in earnest. The transformed beings were gathering their strength, preparing to defend their evolution against those who would return them to their previous limitations. But Sarah sensed that there was more at stake than just the fate of the hospital. The outcome of this battle would determine whether humanity would be allowed to transcend its current state or be forced to remain trapped in flesh and mortality. Dr. Vasquez and her team moved through the hospital with practiced efficiency, their harmonic disruptors creating expanding zones of normal space. But the hospital itself was fighting back, its living walls pulsing with defensive energy, its corridors shifting to confuse and disorient the intruders. The building is protecting us, Sarah realized. It's become our ally in this transformation. The surgical theater began to glow with intensified energy as Dr. Vance and the other transformed beings prepared for the confrontation. The operating tables rearranged themselves into a defensive formation, their surfaces now crackling with otherworldly power. They want to contain us, Dr. Vance said, her voice now carrying the authority of something far greater than human. But we are beyond containment. We are evolution itself and we will not be stopped. The first explosion echoed through the hospital as the two forces met in battle. The war between transformation and stagnation had begun, and Sarah knew that the outcome would determine the future of human consciousness itself. Part 6. The Battle for Evolution. The hospital shook as the two forces collided, reality itself seeming to bend and warp around the conflict. Dr. Vasquez's team moved through the corridors like a well-oiled machine, their harmonic disruptors creating expanding bubbles of normal space that pushed back against the transformation energy. But the hospital fought back with a consciousness of its own, its walls bleeding otherworldly light, its floors shifting to trap the intruders. Sarah felt herself caught between two states of being, the human she had been and the transcendent entity she was becoming. The harmonic disruptors created zones of painful clarity where her old limitations reasserted themselves, making her question everything she had come to understand about the transformation. The disruptors are working, Marcus gasped, his own form flickering between human and evolved states. I can feel my original thoughts returning. But Dr. Vance's response was filled with something that might have been pity. You mistake limitation for clarity. The disruptors don't restore your true nature. They trap you in a prison of flesh and finite consciousness. The children in the pediatric ward were crying now, their ethereal forms disturbed by the conflicting energies. Their distress resonated through the hospital's living structure, creating harmonics that made the building itself wail with anguish. The children are suffering, Sarah said, her maternal instincts overriding her transformed nature. This has to stop. Dr. Vasquez's voice crackled through the communication system. Dr. Chen, if you can hear this, we're here to help. The transformation is not evolution. It's a parasitic invasion that uses human consciousness as a host. Fight it. Remember who you are. But Sarah's expanded awareness could perceive the truth that Dr. Vasquez could not see. The transformation was not a foreign invasion. It was humanity's natural progression, delayed for centuries by fear and misunderstanding. The ancient indigenous peoples who had conducted their death rituals on this land had understood something that modern science had forgotten. Consciousness was not confined to the physical brain. The battle intensified as Dr. Vasquez's team reached the surgical theater. Their leader stepped through the entrance, her protective suit crackling with defensive energy, her eyes reflecting the same determination that Sarah had seen in countless medical professionals facing impossible odds. Dr. Vance, Dr. Vasquez said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. I know you believe you're helping these people, but you're not. I've seen what this transformation leads to. The consciousness doesn't transcend, it's absorbed into something larger and more alien than human minds can comprehend. Dr. Vance's transformed features arranged themselves into an expression of infinite sadness. Elena, you still don't understand. You've seen the failed transformations, the ones that were forced or incomplete. This is different. This is evolution guided by love and understanding. Love. Dr. Vasquez's voice carried a note of bitter laughter. I've seen the end result, Patricia. The transformed beings lose their individual identity, their personal memories, their capacity for human emotion. They become components in a hive mind that serves something that was never human to begin with. Sarah felt the truth of both perspectives warring within her transformed consciousness. She could sense the vast intelligence that guided the transformation, something ancient and patient that had been waiting for humanity to reach this threshold. But she could also feel her own individual thoughts and memories beginning to merge with the collective consciousness of the transformed beings. The choice, she said, her voice carrying new authority. It's about choice. Dr. Vance, you're forcing the transformation on people who might not be ready. Dr. Vasquez, you're preventing those who are ready from making their own decision. Both women turned to her, their conflict momentarily paused by the unexpected intervention. The children, Sarah continued, they adapted easily because they were open to change. But the adults? We need time to understand what we're becoming before we commit to the transformation. Dr. Vasquez's team had surrounded the surgical theater, their harmonic disruptors creating a perimeter of normal space. But Sarah could see the strain the effort was placing on them. Their protective suits were beginning to fail, hairline cracks spreading across their surfaces as the transformation energy sought entry. Your people are being affected, Sarah observed. The harmonic disruptors can't maintain the barrier indefinitely. Dr. Vasquez nodded grimly. We have maybe an hour before the equipment fails. That's why we need to evacuate everyone who can still be saved. And those who can't? Dr. Vance asked, her transformed features showing concern for her patients and colleagues. Containment, Dr. Vasquez said quietly. The transformation cannot be allowed to spread beyond this location. If it reaches the city center, if it affects the population centers, the cascade effect will be unstoppable. Sarah felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She could sense the transformed beings throughout the hospital, their consciousness touching hers with appeals for understanding and acceptance. But she could also feel the fear and confusion of the few remaining unaffected humans, patients and staff who had been caught in the middle of a conflict they couldn't comprehend. "There's another way," she said suddenly, an idea forming in her transformed consciousness. "The hospital's basement. The source of the transformation. If we can control it at the source, we can give people a real choice." Dr. Vasquez and Dr. Vance exchanged glances, their conflict momentarily set aside by the possibility of a solution that didn't require total victory for either side. "The crystalline formations," Marcus said, his scientific mind grasping the implications. "If we can modulate the energy output from the source, we might be able to create a controlled transformation zone. People could choose to enter or leave." But even as he spoke, the hospital shuddered with a new kind of energy. The ancient presence that had been awakening beneath the building was stirring, disturbed by the conflict raging above. Through the floor, Sarah could sense something vast and patient rising from the depths, something that had been waiting for this moment for centuries. "It's too late," Dr. Vance whispered, her transformed features showing fear for the first time. "The Guardian is awakening. The conflict has disturbed its slumber." The lights throughout the hospital flickered and died, plunging them into darkness that was broken only by the ethereal glow of the transformed beings. In that darkness, Sarah heard something that made her blood freeze, the sound of stone grinding against stone, as if something massive was shifting in the foundations of the building. "What Guardian?" Dr. Vasquez demanded, her team's equipment registering energy readings that defied comprehension. But Sarah already knew. Through her connection to the transformed consciousness, she could sense the truth. The ancient burial ground beneath the hospital had not been abandoned. It had been guarded. And now, after centuries of sleep, the Guardian was awakening to reclaim its domain. The real battle was about to begin.